Chapter 11 deals with safe facilities and equipment. How can we design our facilities to make sure we get the most bang for our buck and making sure that we are doing it in a safe manner as well. So in this chapter, we're going to look at reviewing of construction plans. We're going to talk about correct flooring, interior finishes, including walls, doors, ceilings, requirements for restrooms, hand washing stations, food contact surfaces, talking about organizations that will certify equipment to meet certain standards. We're going to talk about requirements for dishwashing facilities, how to install equipment, approved water sources and testing requirements. How do we prevent cross connection and backflow and what those actually mean? How do we have the correct response to wastewater overflow if it so happens in our kitchens? Looking at lighting intensity requirements for different areas within our facility. We're going to talk about preventing lighting sources from contaminating food, how to prevent ventilation systems from contaminating food, how the requirements are for to handle garbage, including storage and removal, and making sure that we are keeping our facilities in good repair. So construction plan review. So something that we have to understand is, when we're building out a facility, that's not something that we can just, put it on the back of a napkin and, call it a day. It does take work and it does take money that's involved to make sure that these are being taken care of correctly. Because typically your construction plans for your kitchen are going to require approval by the regulatory authorities. So the health department, along with building and codes, are all going to play a role into it. So it's not just the building department, building and codes enforcement when it comes to how to put in this kitchen, but also the health department is going to play a critical role in that. By having a plan review, you're making sure that the design meets or exceeds the regulatory requirements that are required for your city or county. It's going to help ensure the safe flow of all food, that everything is coming together nicely. It can save you time and money because if you make sure you get it right the first time, you're not spending more money to redo something and more time because of the redo that has to come along with it. You're making sure that your contractors are taking care of the facilities and then constructing them correctly, again, so you save money and time and hassle comes along with it. And you're making sure that approved equipment's being used. So those are some things that you look at when it comes to construction review. When we look at the design of our facilities, we want to look at layout. One of the best things we need to look at is how the workflow happens within your kitchen. So with workflow, you're trying to minimize the time food is spent in the temperature danger zone. And of course, you want to minimize the number of times that food is handled. So you can see in the picture there on the right, the receiving area, you go in from the receiving area to the coolers, freezers, or dry storage, from the dry storage then to the prep line to be prepared. You notice chemical storage is a totally separate area. We've talked about that in the previous chapters as far as making sure that our chemicals are being stored separately so we don't accidentally make somebody sick through chemical contamination. We look at that contamination issue. How do we minimize the risk of cross-contamination? How do we place equipment correctly so we prevent splashing or spillage? We also need to look at accessibility. So the equipment is easily cleaned at the facility and all of the equipment. Again, we want to make sure that when we are designing the kitchen that we make it not only efficient for us to cook, prep, and serve through, we also want to make sure it is designed so it's easy to be clean, because if it's not easy to be clean, what's going to happen? We're probably not going to clean it, right? It's kind of how it happens in the home and how it can happen in the commercial kitchen as well. But both of them are a problem, but in the commercial kitchen, even more so. So we want to make sure that when we are looking at design and layout, that we are making sure that everything is easily cleanable as well. So flooring, start at the bottom, right? Some parts to flooring. It needs to be smooth, needs to be durable, non-absorbent, easy to clean. It needs to be wear resistant and it needs to be slip resistant. Right? Then what we look at is porosity. Porosity is how something will absorb liquid, right? And we want a low porosity because we don't want to absorb liquid. You don't want, I think of like lumber. You don't want a wood floor that once liquid hits it, it's going to get absorbed into that because you're not going to be able to clean it. You want something that has that low porosity so it does not absorb the liquid, and it's something that we can clean a lot easier. There's no one set style of flooring that can be used. There's many different types of options. Of course, it's going to determine like what's already there that you can use, budget, any other modifications that maybe your local health department will allow or not allow all come into play with that. But we need to make sure that our flooring are adhering to those different parts to it to make sure, again, you're creating a safe environment for your staff to work in. So when we look at these areas, especially, we want to make sure we're using non-absorbent flooring. So walk-in coolers, prep and storage areas, dishwashing, restrooms, dressing and locker rooms. You don't want to put carpet. Think about it, non-absorbent, right? That's probably an easy one, especially for us when it comes to thinking about home. We definitely don't want to have anything like carpet in any of those areas. That wouldn't make sense. Dining room, carpet's not a problem. A lot of places have carpet that they use, but when you want to get into a walk-in cooler, carpet doesn't make sense. Your storage or prep areas, your dishwashing area, non-absorbent flooring is what you're going to want to make sure that you are not harboring any bacteria or other microbes in the flooring that could potentially become a problem later down the road. So non-porous resilient flooring. So an option that a lot of places use, some advantages, it's fairly inexpensive. It's pretty easy to maintain and clean. It wears well and it resists grease and alkalis. However, it can be easily damaged and it can also be slippery when wet. You see that a lot, like you see in the picture there with the tile floors. When that gets wet, it's definitely a hazard when it comes to how slick it can be. And if a lot of something heavy drops on it, they could easily crack with those. But again, you're trying to weigh the pros and cons that come to that. And any of those cons, how do you offset those cons that go along with it? Hard surface flooring, again, durable, non-absorbent, depending on the style, it could be slip resistant. However, they can be easily damaged as well. They do not absorb sound. So, if it's a loud kitchen anyway, it kind of intensifies that. Hard surface flooring can be expensive to install and maintain, could be a little more difficult to clean, and of course can be slippery when it's wet. Carpeting, sound absorbent, easy to maintain. So that's great for front of the house and stuff, but definitely not good for high dirt areas. And it's going to probably require routine cleaning that comes along with it. It does not make sense in most instances for some of those high traffic areas, especially within your kitchen, that you need to worry about that non-absorbent area. Special flooring needs. So non-slip surfaces, if you have them, if you can get them, are great, and especially in the entire kitchen. We in the culinary kitchen have a really cool non-slip flooring that was put in when they redid our facility. And you'll see it. If you haven't been in the kitchen yet, you'll feel it when you come in. It has that built-in non-skid, and it has a little bit of cushioning to it too, which is really nice, helping for a little, instead of having the anti-fatigue mats all around our kitchen, it's all built into the flooring itself. You can find, though, that rubber mats can be used where standing water can occur, especially in the dish room area and stuff, where it could create a slippery environment. Those rubber mats are a nice option. Coving, which you see there in the picture, is required for resilient or hard surface flooring material. Reason why is it makes it easier to clean. It also, if you notice, doesn't have a gap, so it makes it tougher for pests to want to hide, so it doesn't create a home for pests. And it can reduce moisture damage to walls because the coving goes up the side of it so you don't get water underneath and going into where the walls are at and potentially damaging the walls, especially again in areas where you have a potential high moisture environment to begin with. Walls and ceilings, again, you sound kind of familiar. Smooth, non-absorbent, durable, easy to clean. That's the requirements that you have for them. It doesn't care, color wise or anything like that to an extent, but they do just make sure that they meet those requirements for it. So getting into actual areas, so we talked about floors and walls. Now let's talk about rooms. So your dry storage. Okay? First and foremost, you need to make sure you have easily to clean materials that allow good air circulation and are made of corrosion resistant metals or food grade plastic. The food grade plastic is freaking awesome. We have started changing out a lot of our shelving and stuff to this food grade plastic. Our next setup I know is going to be into the walk-ins and such, because 11 years ago when we got the new facility, we had, great product, but you can tell with the high humidity and stuff like that, the coolers, it's starting to wear on it. Where with the food grade plastic, those are concerns that you don't need to necessarily worry about. If your budget allows the use of that, is definitely a good idea to look at. But we also understand that it doesn't necessarily work for everybody, and there are great options for people to be able to use that have some good corrosion resistant metal. Now remember, it's corrosion resistant, not corrosion proof. Doesn't mean that's never going to, but it's definitely going to go a lot longer if it's that corrosion resistant. With dry storage, you should also make sure that it's not an area where there's any direct sunlight, because we don't necessarily want direct sunlight affecting shelf life of product that you might have in dry storage. There should be no exposed steam pipes, water lines, or other conduits that could potentially create a problem. Make sure that being a dry storage area, we want to make sure there are no cracks or crevices in the floors or walls. And if there are, that they get filled in. Again, we'll talk about this in a different chapter, but a big part of that is making sure that we are not allowing pests into these areas to potentially, give them a reason to want to hang out and stick around for a while. You should always have self-closing doors with these facilities, and you should use screens on any windows or doors that lead to the outside. So if there is a dry storage that has a direct access to the outside, you need to make sure that there are screens with those windows and doors as well. So a hand washing station. So your county health department is going to tell you, okay, this is the amount of hand washing stations you need for the square footage that you have. And it can vary from county to county. So again, that's why it's good to do those plans, plus with working within what's going on. You'll see within our 2 savory kitchens, we have 3 hand washing sinks. Then there is one hand washing sink in the bakery. And then there's also one that's in the bakery storage as well. And then on just the other side, there's one in the dish room. So according to the square footage that we have for each of those kitchens, shows what we need as far as hand washing stations. And again, that is based upon what your county health department regulations are. Of course, they need to be conveniently located. You want to make sure that they are an area that are pretty easy to access. They, of course, would need to be located either in restrooms or directly next to them. So it does give you a little bit of an option when it comes to that. Food prep areas need hand wash stations. Any service areas and dishwashing areas all have requirements for hand washing stations, which we do have all of those within our facility at Dogwood Hall. Hand washing stations are just used for hand washing. That's all you want to use them for. That's all you're allowed to use them for, I should say. They need to make sure that they either have a distance, like an adequate distance between hand washing and food contact surfaces, or they're installed with an adequate barrier. So if you notice on that top picture, they have that little partial wall that's next to the hand washing station. That's to create that barrier between whatever food contact surface is right next to it. Where in the bottom picture, there's no barrier, there's no wall, because there's enough space to allow it to be able to be freestanding by itself without imposition with anything else. Of course, also in that picture, you notice they have the food stuff in it. That's not what those are for. Those are for use for just hand washing. We need to make sure our stations are working correctly, that they're stocked and maintained, and they're available at all times, which means do not block them. That means we cannot have a portable piece of equipment in front of that hand washing station. It needs to be accessible at all times of the day. So if you have to move some things around for service or something along those lines, that's cool. You just have to make sure that it's not blocking a hand washing station, because that is a big no-no with the health department. So all hand washing stations must have hot and cold running water, needs to have soap, a way to dry your hands, a garbage container, and then the signage about employees washing their hands before returning to work. One of these things, if you notice, is not on there. It does not need a mirror. That's something that, yeah, we see them in the restrooms and stuff, but it's not a requirement. The requirements are the hot and cold running water, has to have soap, a way to dry hands, a garbage container, and that signage are what we require as far as any hand washing stations. So sinks in general. So one of the best ways to make sure we're preventing cross contaminations is to use the sink for its intended purposes. So a hand washing sink is just for hand washing. A prep sink is just for prep work, for washing vegetables and things like that. A service sink, like what you see on the right, on the picture on the right, is just used for emptying out or filling buckets for mopping, things along those lines. You don't want to use a service sink to rinse your vegetables off, right? Likewise, you don't want to use a prep sink to drain the dirty water from the mop bucket that you just used. And of course, we've already talked about, you just use hand washing sinks to wash your hands, right? At least one service sink is required in the facility. Ours is actually located in the custodian's closet, which for our kitchens, it's a little weird, but in our building, it's actually located inside the men's restroom. So you go into the men's restroom, there's a door on the right-hand side, and that door takes you into the custodian closet. That is where our mop bucket and our service sink is all located at. So, and that one is locked typically, so it does require a key. So you need to see one of the chefs to see about getting the key to get in there if we need to get a mop or something along those lines. So we do have one. It's just in a little bit different location than I think most people would think of. Restrooms. So when we look at restrooms, ideally there should be separate for staff and guests when possible. However, it's not a requirement. So if restrooms are shared, you have to have it designed so the guests do not have to go through prep areas. So that's the biggest thing. If you're going to use a shared restroom between your staff and your guests, it has to be easily accessible for the guests where they do not have to go through a part of your kitchen in order to get to that. If that's the way it's set up, you have to do a reset or you have to create new restrooms for guest usage. Okay, so if you can do a separate staff and guest restroom, that's cool. Staff restroom is going to be located usually in the kitchen area, but then the guest restrooms are in a place where they do not have to access your kitchen in order to go to the restroom. They need to be relatively convenient, so you don't want to have to hike a quarter of a mile to go take a potty break. They, of course, need to be sanitary. They need to be up to all plumbing codes and making sure that they are working correctly, all that fun stuff. They need to be equipped with self-closing doors. So just like in a lot of facilities, you want to make sure that the door to the restroom has that self-closing feature on it, that it can open and close on its own. They should be adequately stocked. So of course, soap, towels, toilet paper, the whole kit and caboodle. And then of course you have to provide garbage containers for you to get rid of the used towels things along those lines. If you provide dressing rooms and lockers, note a couple things for that. First off, dressing rooms or lockers are not for holding food. They're not a place to for food prep, for storage, utensil washing, anything like that. They can't be, in this case, multi-purpose. You need to make sure that lockers are located in a separate room, or one where food, equipment, utensils, linens, and service items cannot be contaminated. So they have to be in its own separate area away from anything that there might be some cross-contamination potentially going because of what you might be storing in your locker. So the building itself. So when you look at the building itself, first and foremost, we want to make sure that the parking lots and the walkways are graded to prevent standing water. We don't want to have a bunch of pools of water going on within our facility. And we want to make sure that they are surfaced to minimize dirt and dust, so that they are set up so they can minimize dirt and dust debris. Other things, of course, for the premises, no guest traffic through prep areas. We kind of talked about that with the restroom, but just kind of a reiteration. Your guests should not have to be walking through your kitchen. And if you are working with a restaurant, there should be no living or sleeping quarters that are directly a part of direct access to it. That doesn't mean that there can't be living or sleeping quarters above or below, but they have to have separate entrances. They have to have all their own setup. You can't have to go through the kitchen or go through your restaurant in order to get to an apartment or something along those lines. So you just have to be conscientious about that, the fact that you're not accessing your living space through the kitchen or through the restaurant itself. Okay, so how about equipment? So talked about the building and walls and different other issues when it comes to sinks, things like that. But what about equipment itself? So some things that equipment needs to be. They need to be smooth, easy to clean, durable, resistant to damage. Sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? With a few other things we've been talking about. Now, some organizations develop standards for sanitary design construction. They're usually certified equipment that meet these standards, and these are typically accredited by ANSI, A-N-S-I. There's other ones that can be classified equipment that meet standards that are developed, and those also need to be ANSI certified as well. It's just one of those that if they meet the requirements for ANSI, then they that they are meeting certain minimum qualifications for commercial establishments. So a couple of things you can look at is the NSF mark is one. You can also look at a ULEPH mark, and you can also look at an ETL mark, or a few of the acronyms that you'll see when it comes to commercial equipment. And it's interesting, if you want to kind of look at the difference, look at the difference between, let's say, a commercial juicer and its requirements and its sanitation and its certifications, and then look at a home juicer. They're not usually set up with the same requirements and the same setup. But you also have to remember too that a commercial juicer is meant to be used on a daily basis, for longer periods of time. So it's more of a workhorse, where your home juicer you're going to be using occasionally, not at the same level that you would one that you would do commercially. So dishwashers. So when it comes to dish machines, they have some different types of dishwashers that you can use depending on the size of your facility and what your dishwashing needs are. So the one that we have is the first one there, single tank stationary rack machine with doors. And that's actually what you see there in the picture. Usually a single station. There's handles that lift doors up. You slide the rack in, you close the door, it starts the dishwashing process. When it's done, you lift the doors up, you pull out the rack, and then you can continue that process. You have conveyor machines, which are longer versions of them. You feed the rack into the one side, and then a conveyor takes it straight across through the different stations in order to get it clean. You have carousel or circular conveyor machines, which work similar to the regular conveyor machines, but in a circular format. So it takes up less linear footage. It's not as long, but it's usually a little bit larger. But it's another way, if you have a lot of product that you need to run through that a single tank is not going to cut it, you can do it with less linear feet that you might need for it. Then you have different types of steps. You have a flight type, a batch type dump, or recirculating door type non-dump machine. And that refers to the ways that the water is recirculated, how much water they use each time. When it comes to it, is it done where each batch it dumps water and pretty much starts again, especially if you have a low water usage for those machines, or is it one that they recirculate the water and then there's just a little bit that is dumped out and then added to at times instead of all of it being dumped all at once. When we look at how we install any of these dishwashers, obviously they need to be conveniently located, reachable. They need to be installed so that the equipment and their food contact surfaces do not become contaminated. So we need to make sure that they are proper distances as far as garbage and other things where you're not necessarily contaminating those clean dishes and stuff. They need to be 6 inches off the floor so we can clean them underneath. We need, of course, follow the manufacturer's instructions on how to use them. And we need to make sure that the water pipes to the machine are as short as possible to prevent heat loss. So you want to have the least travel possible of the machines, just so you have less heat loss that's happening when it comes to the operation of the dish machine. So when we're looking at what machine we want to use, so we want to make sure that if we're using this machine, that the detergents and the sanitizers are approved by our health department. We want to make sure that they can measure water temperature, pressure, and concentrations as part of what is needed for maintaining and utilizing the dish machine. We need to make sure that the correct settings are posted on the machine and that the information about those are posted conspicuously so people can see. We want to make sure that the thermometer within the machine is following, it has increments no greater than 2 degrees, and it's located where it's readable, so we can always see what that temperature machine is going on. Plus, we need to make sure they're, like everything else, is easy to clean. So you can see here in the picture, it's a hot water sanitizing machine. So the wash temperature is at 160. The final rinse gets up to 180 degrees. The supply or the pressure is 5 psi, 20 plus 5 or minus 5 psi, and that the conveyor speed is 6.2 feet per minute. So it's giving you that information of how this machine is going to work effectively so that they can make sure that they are within those parameters. Now, the other side to it with dish machines is also you have 3-compartment sinks. With a 3-compartment sink, the first thing we need to be thinking about is that we purchase a sink large enough to accommodate large equipment and utensils. That's why 3-compartment sinks commercially are much bigger than your sink at home would be, because we're not necessarily using those large, 20-quart mixers that need to go in a 3-compartment sink to be washed, rinsed, and sanitized. So we need to maybe thinking about that as far as the size of our 3-compartment sink so that we can actually accommodate equipment to be able to wash through those sinks. When it comes to coolers and freezers, we need to make sure we're buying commercial brand. So those doors that will withstand heavy use, opening and closing. There has to be a drain provided for defrosting that goes in. Make sure that they're installed correctly. If they are walk-ins, They are sealed to the floor and the wall, so it doesn't allow pests to get in. If they're reach-ins, they need to be elevated 6 inches off the floor, or mounted and sealed on a masonry base. Again, so there's no place for pests or anything to try to get in and make a home. If you notice with these units, we don't necessarily call them refrigerators or freezers, we call them walk-ins or reach-ins to differentiate between the two. And I'm guessing you can kind of guess there what the difference between those two would actually be. Of course, they need to make sure that we meet temperature requirements. You know, if it's a cooler, we need to make sure that they are being able to keep at 41 or below. If they're a freezer, we need to make sure that they're keeping them typically at 0 or below in most instances. They should have built-in thermometers. They should be easy to locate, easy to read, and accurate to within 3 degrees plus or minus Fahrenheit. Couple other specialty pieces of equipment that you might have. We have one of these actually in the facility, and that is the blast chiller. So what's nice about blast chillers is they allow food to be chilled at even a more rapid temperature than in a regular walk-in or reach-in cooler, because it is taking that cold air and circulating it around, kind of like a convection oven would do. So it's forcing the cold air in this case around your product to chill it faster than if it would just be in a traditional walk-in or reach-in refrigerator. Many blast chillers allow target food temperatures to be set, so you can set what you want the food temperature to be, get down to, and they can monitor food temperatures. That's great, especially for HACCP and such. And our blast chillers actually have that option as far as thermometer based, so you can set that you want the internal temperature to be a certain temperature before it shuts down, or you can do it time based. And it also has a monitor on it that you can record. It's a written one, it's not a digital, but it can do a written record as far as time and temperatures when it comes to the blast chilling or blast freezing for HACCP purposes. Now, a tumble chiller are where you cool prepackaged foods inside of a drum that rotates in chilled water. So those are really good for chilling. You know, let's say you've made up soup and you transfer the soup to containers, or not containers, sorry, not like Cambro containers, but more like plastic, like bag containers. Those can go in the drum and it rotates in the chilled water in order for it to cool down faster for that. But that doesn't work for stuff that's just out covered with plastic wrap. You need to make sure it's sealed inside something and then chilled while it's inside that bag typically. Those you see more along the lines of commercial processing. You don't see them as much in the typical kitchen environment. Now, you can also look at cook chill equipment, and that's a piece of equipment that can cook, cool, and reheat food all in one fell swoop. Those are great for utilizing in catering settings are really good. If you're doing large quantity cooking, it's really nice to do. But you don't see them as much, again, in most kitchens, because it's one thing to cook or to reheat, but then to cook it and chill it in the same a piece of equipment is a little bit more specialized and outside of most scopes of a kitchen. Not that a kitchen would not have one, but there's less probability of it than what you would see in a commissary that is doing food to go out to other individual places or in large production facilities. Cutting boards. Cutting boards can be wooden or synthetic. Wood cutting boards and baker's tables, you need to make sure, first off, if you're doing wooden, that they're allowed by the health department. You gotta make sure your health department allows wooden cutting boards or wooden baker's tables. They need to be made from a very hard wood that's non-absorbent. They need to be a non-toxic material or wood. There's not putting any type of coating or anything that would be considered toxic. And then we need to make sure that they are free of cracks and seams. So we do have a wooden board that we use in the butcher shop. It's our butcher block that we use. And it's one that our county health department allows it. It's meets the requirements as far as the hardwood's concerned. There's no non-toxic material. It is free of cracks and seams. Now through the use of it and things, of course, you're going to get cracks and seams. And so from time to time, our maintenance department will come in and actually sand it down, smooth it out, apply a food grade cover on top. So it's still ready to go, because it does get wore down through the use that we have when we're butchering different items and stuff. But first thing you got to do is make sure your health department even allows the use of them within your county. So you've heard this already, but just to kind of reiterate, when you are having any floor mounted equipment, they need to meet one of two criteria, which is, again, a really, really important one to know. It will be on tests, and it's something that we'll probably see in your manager test at the end of the semester, as well as what you see, of course, on the test I give you. But if you have floor equipment, they need to meet one of two criteria as far as how to mount them. They need to be mounted either 6 inches above the surface, like in the picture you see on the right there, and that allows for easy cleaning, or it has to be sealed to a masonry base, has to be sealed to a solid base, so it does not allow dirt, dust, food particles, or anything like that to get underneath. So it has to be either sealed to the floor, or it has to have at least a 6-inch clearance underneath of the equipment, so it's easily cleanable. Now, if it's tabletop equipment, so if it's stuff that goes on your table, it either has to be sealed to the countertop or 4 inches off of the countertop. So for the floor, it's 6 inches off the floor or sealed. If it's tabletop equipment, it has to be 4 inches off the tabletop or sealed to the tabletop. Okay. Again, important numbers for you to remember down the road. So once equipment's installed, of course, we use it. We also have to make sure it's maintained. We need to make sure that we are hiring qualified people to maintain the equipment itself. It's something that, your dishwasher maintains it. Unless they're qualified to do that, unless they have that background and able to do stuff like that, hire it to be done, whether you have maintenance in-house that are qualified to do it, or if you have to hire an outside company to come and do it. Please make sure you're having those qualified people maintain it. It's going to save you money in the long run, because it's going to extend the shelf life of it. And it's also going to save you money because it could prevent your equipment from going down, which could result in food loss. Okay. Make sure you set up a maintenance schedule with your supplier or manufacturer, and then check regularly to make sure it's working correctly. You don't want any oopses, especially on a busy Friday night, right? Now, water supply. So we need to make sure that when we're working in our facilities that we have an acceptable source of drinkable, also known as potable water, right? So a potable water supply, first and foremost, it can come from public water mains that are approved. So for a lot of us, that's usually going to be where we get our potable water, because we're in the city or close enough to the city where there's main water lines that are running through, and that provides potable water. So for the most part, for a lot of us, that's how we're going to get our drinkable or our potable water. Okay. If you are maybe out in the country, there's not a public water mains that are available, you need to have a regularly tested and maintained private source, like a well source. But if you are doing a private source like a well, those have to be regularly tested by the county health department to make sure that it is safe for human consumption. Okay. You could also use closed potable water containers. So portable water containers. So technically, a bottle of water is a closed portable water container. But in trying to fill up a gallon saucepan with water from 16.9 or, half-liter bottles of water are going to take you a bit. Of course, they also make 5-gallon containers, things like that. So, that could be used, especially in an emergency situation, as far as needing potable water. You could use a portable water solution. Or if you have, again, another emergency situation, maybe you have access or can get a water transport vehicle. And these are vehicles that are specifically set up to transport water to different locations. A lot of times you see them like in the military and stuff when they are transporting water to remote, bases and things. They're transporting typically potable water for human consumption when it comes to that. So those last two you don't see very often. Usually they're more emergency situations, where the first two are going to be your main ones, with that first one, for the most of us, probably going to be number one. But again, depending on where you're located, if you don't have access to public water mains, then you have to look at that second option there and making sure it's being tested on a regular basis. Okay. We, of course, here, one of the big things is making sure we have hot water, because the hot water is not only going to be used probably for cooking, but also for cleaning and maintenance and stuff. So we want to make sure that the water heaters are being evaluated, again, by qualified individuals on a regular basis to make sure that they are still doing well. You want to consider how quickly the heater produces water, and maybe a booster heater for hot water sanitizing. If you're doing hot water as your sanitizing agent for your dish machine, you might need a separate booster heater right next to your dish machine in order to jump up the water to a high enough temperature to allow it to sanitize. So something we need to be conscientious about when it comes to water is a cross connection. And a cross connection is a physical link between safe potable water and dirty water, okay, stuff that we wouldn't drink. And a cross connection can happen at a drain, it could happen at a sewer, or it could happen at other wastewater sources. So we need to be conscientious about cross connections, to making sure that we don't have a cross between good water and bad water that we're going to potentially accidentally use for human consumption. Another thing we have to look at is backflow. So a backflow is a reverse flow of contaminants through a cross connection into drinkable water, or back siphonage. And back siphonage is where a vacuum is created that sucks contaminants back into a water supply. You can find that when high water use in one area of the operation creates a vacuum, or a running hose in a mop bucket can lead to it. So an example of that is, you have contaminated water with a hose direct connected, and that hose is in the bad water. And if there happens to be a vacuum that happens, it can actually pull that nasty water up through the sink and into the faucet and go backwards through it. So we want to make sure we're preventing backflow and back siphonage. And the way that we prevent backflow or back siphonages are two ways. One is through a vacuum breaker. And so you can see that there on the picture on the left. And if you go into the kitchen and you see all of our our pot fillers, which we use under our cooking stations to be able to fill water to our pots without having to take them from a sink to whatever, all of them have a vacuum breaker. And what that does is it prevents backflow or back siphonage from happening. That if there happens to be a reverse flow, it actually goes out through that vacuum breaker, and you're going to get water out onto your floor, but it's not going to go back into the line. So a vacuum breaker is one way that you can prevent backflow and siphonage, or the other way is through an air gap. And an air gap is an actual physical gap between the water, between the potable water and the dirty water. And so you can see on the picture of the right, an air gap is just simply at the top, the gap between where the top of the water is and where your faucet is. And it's also an air gap is between where the drain is and where the two parts of the drain meet. And you'll see both of those within our facility, because of course there's an air gap at the top where the sink, the faucet and the sink are at. And then if you look below where all of our drainage is at, you'll see there's an actual air gap between the drain from the sink to the actual floor drain. They're not directly connected. So again, it helps to prevent sewer water from backing up into the good potable water area. So you can prevent backflow through vacuum breakers and through an air gap. Again, those are another ones that are probably going to see on tests in a couple different forms. So it's definitely a good thing to remember to prevent backflow, vacuum breakers, and your air gaps, and know what those both mean. Okay, how about grease condensation or leaking pipes? So one of the things that we can do as far as, when you're pouring stuff down your drain, there are going to be some things that might have oil or grease in it, but it's not enough that you just pour it into a grease disposal, because there's a lot of water as well. And so kitchens are typically required to have a grease trap to prevent grease from blocking drains. And that's what you see there in the picture there on the right-hand side, is that drain goes into a grease trap. And so it allows the water to flow through, but then the grease is actually separated out and allowed to condense and then cleaned out from time to time. We have that in our facility, and our grease trap is actually located in the dish room, in the sink that we would pour dirty water down into it there to the right of the dish machine. So if you happen to have liquid that has a bunch of grease in it, you would not pour it down the sinks in any of the kitchens, regular kitchens, the bake shop or the savory kitchens. You would actually take that to the dish room and pour it down the sink there, because it does have that grease trap. Okay. Grease traps must be in the following. It has to be installed by a plumber. They have to be easy to access, and they need to be cleaned regularly to make sure that they are actually doing their job. But it is something that needs to be taken into consideration, and making sure that you have and that you're using it effectively. If there happens to be a backup of sewage in the operation, of course, first thing is to close up the area right away, making sure it does not get access to. Call that professional to make sure the problem is corrected. And then once the problem is corrected, of course, you want to make sure everything is thoroughly cleaned before you use it. If it gets to a point where the backup is a very big risk to food safety, you've got to stop service. If it's going to potentially make people sick, there's going to be an issue as far as food safety. You got to stop the service, and you need to make sure the health department's informed, getting them involved to get yourself back on track to make sure that everybody and everything is going to be safe. When we are putting lighting in to our kitchens, there are some things that we need to take in consideration. First and foremost, different areas of the facility have different lighting requirements as far as intensity. So your kitchen is going to be lit differently than your dining room, right? You're going to find that most county health departments require prep areas to be brighter than other areas. So like I said, making sure that those prep and cooking areas are a lot brighter than you would find in the dining room or the bar area and stuff. All lights should have either shatter resistant light bulbs, or if they don't have a shatter resistant light bulb, they need to have a protective cover over it in order to prevent any physical contamination in case that light bulb would happen to break. And of course, if the bulb burns out, you need to make sure you're replacing it with that correct size bulb. So minimum lighting intensities by area. So they're what they call foot candles or lux. So 50-foot candles or 540 lux is your prep areas. So that needs to be your highest lighting intensity. 20-foot candle or a 215 lux, dishwashing areas, buffets or salad bars, displays, utensil storage, wait stations, restrooms. inside some pieces of equipment like refrigerators, so they don't have to be as bright as your prep and cook areas. 10-foot candles, which is 108 lux, inside walk-in coolers and freezer units, your dry storage, dining room for cleaning purposes, all need to have that 10-foot candle or 108 lux. Ventilation systems are required as part of a commercial kitchen. They are there to improve air quality. They help to reduce grease and condensation buildup. Of course, we do need to make sure we clean and maintain them, not only with what we do personally within as the business itself, what we're required to do, but also having professionals come in to clean the system and stuff that we cannot access. They have to be used in cooking, frying, and grilling areas, and they must not drip onto food or equipment. Really, if they're dripping on a few food or equipment, it's because you're not cleaning and maintaining them. That's usually the big reason why, if there's anything that's dripping onto your food equipment, is because you're not maintaining them. So it's important that they do get maintained. Now, it's something that we don't necessarily always think about because they're up and away and they just do their job in the background. And but we still need to make sure we're cleaning the vents and the walls and making sure we're doing that regularly so that we are able to maintain good facilities and make sure we don't have any problems with our ventilation systems. On the home stretch here, garbage. Of course, we need to make sure we're removing our garbage from the prep areas as quickly as we can, making sure we're not contaminating food and food contact surfaces. As you can see, the picture there is a no-no. We pull that garbage from the bag from the can. We don't put it up on our prep table to tie it off because now we're potentially cross-contaminating. So you would want to put that on the ground or tie it and then pull it from the bag itself. But you would never want to take the bag out from the garbage can and then set it on a prep table in order to tie it off to take it out to the garbage itself. Make sure that we are cleaning our garbage cans frequently. Clean them away from the food prep and storage areas. So it's a good idea to wear your 3-compartment sink when you're not doing any other cleaning is a good idea for it, like at the end of the shift. Some people take it to where they do their mop or their service sink and use that as another area as a possibility as well. So there's a few different things, but you don't necessarily want to do it while you're prepping or in areas where food and stuff is going to be prepped because we don't want to have any potential cross-contamination. Any type of indoor containers need to be leak-proof, waterproof, and pest-proof, easy to clean, and they need to be emptied or covered when not in use. Your storage areas, those need to make sure that they are designated areas that are stored away from food and food contact surfaces. And you need to make sure that storage is in a situation where it's not a nuisance or a public health hazard. So, it does need to be part when you're planning, where are my waste receptacles going to be located? So they're easy, convenient, but they're also in an area that's not a public health hazard, not a nuisance. And from an aesthetic standpoint, not an eyesore. You don't necessarily want your customers to be walking in your front door and, oh, there's a big waste disposal container right there by the front door type of thing. So you need to make sure that in designing as far as the kitchen, that you also be thinking about, all parts of that, what's coming from the outside as well. The containers need to be placed on a smooth, durable, non-absorbent surface, preferably asphalt or concrete. They need to make sure they have a tight enough fitting lid. They need to make sure they're able to be covered at all times. And they need to have their drain plugs in place so that there's not liquid that's coming out onto the non-absorbent durable surface. So you can see where those are set up are really good. It's in the nice, smooth, durable, non-set surface. So it has the concrete underneath. It has the lid to keep it covered. It's covered at all times. And I'm assuming, you can't see it, but I'm assuming their drain plugs are in place as well. So chapter 11, looks at the kitchen itself, not our processes, not are we maintaining temperatures, things like that. But we look at the things that make our kitchen, from our sinks to our lighting to our equipment, walls, floors, everything in between. And knowing that, all this stuff is extremely important and is regulated by our health department and by food code. So we need to make sure that we have all these things set up and ready to go. In fact, if they're not set up and ready to go, you're not going to be able to even start working in your facility. So an extremely important thing, especially when you are starting up your kitchen and your business, to make sure that you are working proactively with your health department to make sure that everything's on the right page, that everybody is on the same page when it comes to what needs to be done. Everything is good to go, because the last thing you want to do is have time and money wasted because you have to go back and change something because you didn't do it right in the first place. So you need to know what these requirements are, how these are set up, and make sure that you're following them to the law. In a lot of cases, I always recommend, unless you know how to do this as a professional, hire somebody to do it. Hire an architectural company to come in and actually design your kitchen. They know these ins and outs. Those that specialize in commercial kitchens and stuff, that's what they do. Yes, it's going to cost you money, but it's going to save you in the long run, because it's going to get done right and ready to go on the first time, as opposed to you taking 2 or 3 swipes at it because you are just learning as you go. So food for thought when it comes to design and implementation of your kitchen.